I'm Chris Jenkins, the Director of Commercial Applications for Solid State Logic. I've been with Solid State Logic since 1981. With SSL, I started off as the commissioning engineer, installing consoles all over the world, and then moved from commissioning and the service side to product development. Basically, I'm part of the product design team. The whole point of being in a recording studio is to deliver a performance. And I felt very much with the SSL was it enabled the engineer to concentrate more on the getting the musicians to deliver a performance than technology getting in the way of that. And the sonics of having a 4-band equalizer, the high and low pass filters. Colin had chosen the right frequencies. And in those days we used to use a lot more gating and expansion to get rid of noise. All those things had been put in by someone who understood the recording process. And I suppose, Colin, in a sense, was my mentor in terms of, how I looked at approaching the 900 and things like that, was to go back and, look at the stuff that, the things that Colin had done. Even though, sadly, he died when he was 50 in a helicopter crash, one still felt his presence, that he had certain standards, and I've always tried to sort of uphold those. Very much, I think it's having it all in one strip, plus the flexibility of reordering the strip. It's not just I've got an EQ and a dynamics in the channel strip. I can change the order. I can put the EQ before the dynamics, the EQ after the dynamics. I can put the insert point in the middle. I can put the insert point at the end. I can split the filters and put them in a different place from the rest of the EQ. It's that flexibility which previously would have required spaghetti on the patch bay to achieve. You could achieve it and just from sitting in front of the console. It was the passion of the early adopters, very much so. In the UK, it was the guys at Psalm East who, working with Trevor Horn, Gary Langham and Julian Mendelssohn, who pushed it to the limits. And then they went on, when they did Psalm West, they put, 3 studios with SSL consoles. And again, they pushed it to the limits. They pushed, Psalm East was the first UK studio to have linked 24 tracks, and it was doing 48-track recordings and 48-track mixes. And so that they were really using the automation system. And they would be multing signals down multiple channel strips. They seriously pushed the desk, and you can hear it in what they were producing out of it. All the sort of those mixes that come out of, Psalm and those guys, they stand out today. And then if we move over to the other side of the pond, in New York, the New York guys, Bob Clearmountain, Frank Filippetti, and Chris and Tom Lord Alge, again, they were doing the same thing over there. They were passionate about, they wanted to use the console, overloading us sometimes with ideas for the automation system. When we used to do the AES show in New York, we'd hold a users meeting. And normally I was sort of had the short straw of trying to chair the users meeting. And what would happen was I'd have Bob Clearmountain would turn up, Frank would turn up, and I could just basically go home because I could just leave them to it. And someone would ask a question and Bob would go, oh no, I do it like this. And Frank would say, no, you shouldn't do it like that, you should do it like, and I would just leave them to it. And it was great fun. I'm very used to the SSL sound. So I know that if I got a distorted guitar, what I'm going to do, roughly. And the Brainworx responded the way an SSL console would respond. The concept of these little trimmers that is quite neat. It's very novel. I mean, and that they're in the right place. For example, on the gate you can tweak the hysteresis. The gate on the hardware model is fixed. I think it's 5 dBs. But this is being able to tweak the hysteresis if you want to, just gives you more control. The ability to have a sidechain filter without actually having to give up the filters in the main EQ. Again, and what was the other one? Having different threshold ranges. Again,
it's a mixed control.
Plus you've got the parallel. I've never been a great fan of parallel compression, but
some people are.
Some people, for people who do, yes, you've got that there as well. And the stereo linking was very interesting. New parameters like THD and V-Control, they add a different dimension to the plugin because it stops just being a single plugin. It provides a link between them, and it also allows you to sort of emulate what a lot of people would have done on the console. One of the things with the VCA, the VCA versions of the 4000, which were all the early consoles before we put moving faders in, was we had a control called VCA trim, which basically allowed you to move the operating level of the console. As you set up a mix, and then you could go, well, I could run it hotter, I could run it, and the VCA trim allowed you to do that, and that was a very powerful sort of people use that technique quite heavily to sort of find the mythical sweet spot, which is not the same in every console because of the variations in component tolerances, and again the other thing I quite liked was you had the overload LED, and it seemed to actually be doing what I expected the overload LED to indicate. So it always used to indicate clipping way before you were actually clipping and stuff like that. But people, again, would adjust levels to just have the overload light twinkling every now and then. And the very much the sort of the being able to adjust the gain and the THD sort of globally as well as on an individual basis. I found it made it, it gave you a link between, you could put multiple plugins in and you felt much more that it was a console as opposed to a plugin. TMT does make a difference. I used a lot of plugins just to try this out, and yeah, it made subtle changes to the mix. Something that our previous owner, Peter Gabriel, would have enjoyed. He was very much into being able to introduce random changes or a randomness into the mixing process, not so that it wasn't just a sort of series of logical decisions. I would dial in what I would normally dial in on the hardware model, and it sounded how I expected it to sound. So very much the plugin reacted the way that I felt the hardware would have reacted.